The rain hammered against the windows of the Navy base in Norfolk, Virginia, as Lieutenant Marcus Chen reviewed the morning briefings. At 28, he had earned his position through sheer determination and an unwavering belief in military discipline. His office walls displayed commendations and photos from various deployments, but nothing had prepared him for the morning that would change everything. Sarah Martinez walked through the base gates at precisely 0600 hours, her civilian clothes drawing curious glances from the morning watch. She wore simple jeans and a black jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. To most observers, she looked like any other contractor or visitor reporting for duty. But beneath her ordinary appearance lay secrets that only a handful of people in the entire military knew. The assignment briefing was scheduled for 0800 hours in conference room, Delta. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained through years of training that had nothing to do with punctuality and everything to do with survival. She studied the room's layout, noting exits, sight lines, and potential defensive positions. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had kept her alive in places most people couldn't pronounce. Lieutenant Chen entered the conference room with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most qualified person present. He carried a thick folder containing classified mission parameters and personnel files. His eyes swept the room, taking in the handful of support staff and contractors already seated. When his gaze fell on Sarah sitting quietly in the back corner, he felt a flicker of irritation. "Ma'am, this is a classified briefing," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his rank. "I'm going to need to see your clearance documentation." Sarah looked up calmly, her brown eyes meeting his without flinching. "I have the necessary clearance," she replied simply, making no move to produce identification. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. Throughout his career, he had encountered countless civilians who thought they understood military protocol, contractors who believed their corporate badges granted them special privileges, consultants who assumed their expertise exempted them from proper procedures. This woman's casual dismissal of his authority triggered every regulation-focused instinct he possessed. "That's not how this works," Chen said, his voice rising slightly. "Everyone in this room follows the same rules. No exceptions." Sarah remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert. She had faced down enemy combatants in hostile territory, negotiated with warlords who collected ears as trophies, and infiltrated organizations that would torture her for days before granting the mercy of death. A young lieutenant's power play barely registered on her threat assessment scale. "I understand your concern," she said evenly. "Perhaps you should check with your commanding officer before we proceed." The suggestion hit Chen like a slap. In front of a room full of personnel, this civilian was questioning his authority and suggesting he didn't have the clearance to run his own briefing. His military training had taught him that respect for the chain of command was absolute, and that any challenge to authority in public undermined the entire system. "Stand up when I'm addressing you," he commanded, his voice now carrying the full weight of his rank and growing anger. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, but she remained seated. "I don't think that's necessary." The room had gone completely silent. Support staff exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the tension but unsure of its source. The base's air conditioning hummed softly, the only sound breaking the awkward stillness that had settled over the conference room. Chen took 3 quick steps toward Sarah's chair, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Years of military conditioning had taught him that discipline was everything, that order could only be maintained through strict adherence to protocol. This woman's defiance represented everything he had been trained to correct. "I said stand up," he repeated, his voice now barely controlled. Sarah looked up at him, and for just a moment something dangerous flickered in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had killed people with her bare hands, who had survived in situations where mercy was a luxury and hesitation meant death. But the moment passed so quickly that Chen missed it entirely. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "you're making a mistake." But Chen was beyond hearing warnings. His hand moved almost without conscious thought, driven by fury and wounded pride. The slap echoed through the conference room like a gunshot, stunning everyone present into absolute silence. Sarah's head turned slightly with the impact, but she didn't cry out or recoil. Instead, she slowly turned back to face him, her cheek bearing a red handprint that would soon fade to purple. Her expression remained perfectly calm, as if she had just been asked about the weather. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy with shock and disbelief. Several staff members stared at Chen with expressions of horror, while others looked at Sarah with mixtures of sympathy and concern. None of them knew what to do or say. Chen stood frozen, his hand still raised, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what he had just done. Striking a civilian on a military base was a career-ending offense regardless of the circumstances. Court-martial proceedings would likely follow, along with criminal charges and a dishonorable discharge. "Sir," one of the support staff ventured hesitantly. "Should I call the MPs?" Sarah finally stood, moving with fluid grace that spoke of extensive physical training. She was shorter than Chen had expected, maybe 5'6", but something about her presence seemed to fill the room. When she spoke, her voice was steady and unnaturally calm. "That won't be necessary," she said. "Though I think it's time Lieutenant Chen learned exactly who he just struck." She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a leather credential wallet. The movement was smooth and practiced, like someone accustomed to producing identification under stressful circumstances. She opened the wallet and held it out for Chen to see. The lieutenant's face went completely white as he read the identification card. His hands began to shake and his mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. The credential wallet contained information that changed everything he thought he knew about the morning's briefing. The woman he had just slapped was not a contractor, consultant, or civilian visitor. According to the identification in his trembling hands, she was Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, one of only a few dozen active female Navy SEALs in the entire United States military. The credential wallet trembled in Lieutenant Chen's hands as he stared at the impossible identification before him. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Command. With clearance levels that made his own security ratings look like a library card, the embossed Navy SEAL trident seemed to mock him from the official documentation. "This can't be right," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the silent conference room. Sarah took the wallet back with the same calm precision she had shown throughout the encounter. "I can assure you it's quite authentic," she said, sliding the credentials back into her jacket. "Though I understand your confusion. Most people don't expect Navy SEALs to look like me." The truth was that Sarah had spent the last 8 years deliberately cultivating that misconception. At 5'6" with an unassuming build, she had learned to use people's expectations as camouflage. While her male colleagues often stood out in civilian settings due to their obvious military bearing, Sarah could disappear into any crowd, becoming invisible in plain sight. Her journey to the SEALs had begun in childhood, growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles where survival meant learning to fight before learning to read properly. Her father, a Marine veteran struggling with untreated PTSD, had taught her that strength came not from size or gender, but from refusing to quit when everything hurt and hope seemed impossible. The day women were officially allowed to attempt SEAL training, Sarah had been among the first to volunteer. She endured months of preparation, knowing that failure would be attributed not to her individual limitations but to her gender. The weight of representing all women in special operations had nearly crushed her during the darkest moments of training. Hell Week had tested every assumption about her capabilities. While her male classmates relied on brute strength to carry boats and logs, Sarah had developed techniques that leveraged momentum and teamwork. When hypothermia set in during surf torture, she had used meditation techniques learned from her grandmother to separate her mind from her body's suffering. The instructors had pushed her harder than anyone else, looking for the breaking point that would prove women didn't belong in special operations. They made her carry heavier loads, swim longer distances, and complete obstacle courses in shorter time frames. Each impossible standard only strengthened her resolve. Lieutenant Chen looked around the conference room, suddenly aware that every person present had witnessed his catastrophic error in judgment. The support staff stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed disgust. His career was over and everyone in the room knew it. "Chief Martinez," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I need to apologize. I had no idea who you were, but that doesn't excuse my actions. I violated every principle of military conduct." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She had dealt with countless men who couldn't accept her presence in special operations. Some were openly hostile, others patronizingly protective. A few, like Chen, simply couldn't process the contradiction between their expectations and reality. "The question isn't whether you knew my rank," she replied. The question is why you thought striking anyone was acceptable behavior for a military officer. The words hit Chen like physical blows. He realized that his anger hadn't been about protocol or security clearances. It had been about a woman refusing to defer to his authority, something his military training had never prepared him to handle appropriately. Sarah's mission assignment had brought her to Norfolk for reasons she couldn't discuss, even with a lieutenant who held significant clearance. The brief she carried contained intelligence about a terrorist network operating along the East Coast, using military contractors and civilian employees to gather information about base security. For the past 6 months, she had been working undercover in various capacities, building an identity as an unremarkable contractor who could move freely between military installations. The work required her to endure countless small humiliations and assumptions about her capabilities, all while gathering intelligence that could prevent attacks on American soil. Her cover identity had been carefully constructed by Navy intelligence, complete with fabricated work history and references that would satisfy casual scrutiny. The goal was to identify potential security breaches without alerting the terrorist network to the investigation. Chen's outburst had potentially compromised months of careful preparation. If word spread about her true identity, the terrorist might realize they were under surveillance and disappear before authorities could gather enough evidence for arrests. "Sir," one of the younger staff members spoke up hesitantly, "should we continue with the briefing?" Sarah looked at the lieutenant, considering her options. She could file a formal complaint that would end his career within weeks. Military justice was swift and unforgiving when it came to officers who struck enlisted personnel, regardless of circumstances. Alternatively, she could use this situation to her advantage. Chen's guilt and embarrassment might make him more cooperative than he would normally be with a special operations asset he couldn't officially acknowledge. "Lieutenant Chen," she said finally, "I believe we need to have a private conversation about this morning's incident and how we're going to proceed." Chen nodded eagerly, recognizing the lifeline she was offering. "Of course, Chief, whatever you need." Sarah turned to address the room. "Everyone else, please clear out. This briefing is postponed until further notice." The support staff filed out quickly, grateful to escape the uncomfortable situation. Several cast curious glances back at Sarah and Chen, clearly wondering how the confrontation would resolve. When they were alone, Sarah moved to the conference room door and engaged the privacy lock. The soft click echoed in the silent space, emphasizing their isolation. "Do you know why I'm really here, Lieutenant?" she asked, settling into a chair across from him. Chen shook his head, afraid to guess. "I'm hunting terrorists who have infiltrated military contractor networks," Sarah said bluntly. "People who look exactly like what you thought I was when I walked into this room." The implications hit Chen immediately. His assumption about her identity hadn't just been wrong. It had revealed exactly the kind of thinking that made the terrorist infiltration possible. "They count on people like you," Sarah continued. "Officers who see what they expect to see instead of what's actually there. A woman in civilian clothes couldn't possibly be a threat, right? Just like she couldn't possibly be a Navy SEAL." Chen felt sick as he realized how perfectly he had demonstrated the security vulnerabilities Sarah was investigating. His prejudices and assumptions had blinded him to possibilities that could get people killed. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the conference room, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized her prey was more useful alive than dead. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying Lieutenant Chen's face as the full weight of his situation settled over him. She had learned to read people during her years in special operations, where missing subtle cues could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Chen's expression showed genuine remorse mixed with growing fear about his career prospects. "Before we discuss what happens next," Sarah said, "I need you to understand something about the mission you just compromised." She reached into her jacket and withdrew a secure tablet. Its military-grade encryption evident from the multiple authentication prompts that appeared as she powered it on. The device contained intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture of terrorist infiltration across multiple Navy installations. 3 months ago, intelligence analysts noticed unusual patterns in base security reports, Sarah began, turning the tablet so Chen could see the data. Equipment manifests that didn't match actual inventory. Patrol schedules that had been subtly altered. Security camera footage with suspicious gaps. Chen studied the information, his military training helping him recognize the significance of what he was seeing. Someone with inside access was systematically mapping Navy security procedures, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited for a larger attack. The infiltrators aren't obvious foreign agents, Sarah continued. They're people who blend in perfectly. Contractors, temporary staff, even some military personnel who've been compromised through blackmail or financial pressure. The scope of the operation was staggering. The terrorist network had spent years building a presence within military contractor companies, placing operatives in positions where they could gather intelligence without arousing suspicion. They looked like everyone else, spoke like everyone else, and carried credentials that passed standard security checks. Sarah's cover identity as an unremarkable contractor had allowed her to move between installations, observing security procedures and identifying potential infiltrators. The work required incredible patience, as she couldn't act on suspicious behavior without concrete evidence that would hold up in military court. This morning's briefing was supposed to coordinate with base security about a suspected operative, Sarah explained. Someone we've been tracking for weeks who's scheduled to begin work here next Monday. Chen felt his stomach drop as he realized the implications. His outburst hadn't just been inappropriate, it had potentially alerted enemies to the investigation that was closing in on them. The people in that conference room, he said slowly. Some of them might be compromised, yes, Sarah confirmed. Which is why your little display was particularly problematic. If word gets back to the wrong people that a Navy SEAL is asking questions about contractor security, our target will disappear before we can gather actionable intelligence. The terrorist Sarah was tracking had been particularly clever, using his position as an IT contractor to access multiple base computer systems. He had been collecting information about troop movements, equipment specifications, and security protocols for months, always careful to avoid triggering automatic monitoring systems. The breakthrough had come when Sarah noticed that certain security reports contained subtle linguistic patterns that suggested they had been edited by someone whose first language wasn't English. Cross-referencing those reports with contractor access logs had led them to their primary suspect. His name is David Kozlov, Sarah said, showing Chen a photograph on the tablet. Came to the U.S. 12 years ago, built a perfect cover identity as a small business owner specializing in military IT support. Kozlov's company had won contracts at 7 different Navy installations over the past 3 years, always performing excellent work while secretly documenting everything he observed. His team members were unaware of his true activities, making them perfect unknowing accomplices in intelligence gathering. We have enough evidence to arrest him, Sarah continued, but what we really want are his contacts, the network he's feeding information to, and any planned attacks they might be coordinating. Chen studied Kozlov's photograph, memorizing the features of a man who looked completely ordinary. Middle-aged, slightly overweight, with the kind of forgettable face that would never stand out in a crowd. The perfect spy. That's where you come in, Lieutenant, Sarah said. Your morning briefing was going to establish protocols for monitoring Kozlov when he arrives on base. Now we need to make sure that still happens, despite your dramatic introduction to my identity. Chen nodded eagerly, desperate for a chance to redeem himself. What do you need me to do? First, we need to control the narrative about what happened in that conference room, Sarah replied. Everyone who witnessed our confrontation needs to believe they saw exactly what they expected to see. A contractor getting put in her place by military authority. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The same assumptions that had led to Chen's inappropriate behavior would now serve as camouflage for Sarah's true mission. You're going to write up the incident as a minor security breach, Sarah instructed. An overly aggressive contractor who was properly corrected and reminded of military protocol. Nothing unusual, nothing worth gossiping about. Chen pulled out his notebook, already formulating the report that would protect Sarah's cover while minimizing his own culpability. Second, Sarah continued, we need to make sure Kozlov's arrival proceeds exactly as planned. Any changes to his access permissions or work assignments might alert him that he's under surveillance. She showed Chen additional intelligence reports detailing Kozlov's planned activities on the base. His IT work would give him access to multiple secure areas, ostensibly to maintain computer systems but actually to gather intelligence about base operations. Your job is to ensure he has everything he needs to feel confident and unsuspicious, Sarah explained. Treat him exactly like any other contractor. No special attention, no unusual restrictions. The strategy required incredible restraint. Every instinct Chen possessed as a security-conscious officer would urge him to watch Kozlov closely. But that attention could compromise the larger investigation. Meanwhile, I'll be monitoring his activities through means I can't discuss, Sarah added. The goal is to identify his contacts and communication methods without alerting him to our surveillance. Chen realized he was being offered a chance to participate in a genuine counterintelligence operation, something far more significant than his usual administrative duties. The opportunity to contribute to national security might help offset the career damage from his morning mistake. There's one more thing, Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious. If this operation goes wrong, if Kozlov realizes he's being watched and activates whatever network he's built, people will die. Maybe civilians, maybe military personnel, but definitely Americans who don't deserve to pay for our mistakes. The weight of responsibility settled over Chen like a physical presence. His actions over the next few days could determine whether a terrorist attack succeeded or failed. Monday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Lieutenant Chen sat in his office reviewing David Kozlov's contractor paperwork for the third time. Every detail memorized, but still offering no obvious clues about the man's true intentions. The forms were perfect, too perfect perhaps, but in a way that would only seem suspicious to someone already looking for deception. Sarah had spent the weekend establishing her surveillance position, using her contractor credentials to gain access to areas where she could observe Kozlov's movements without being detected. Her years of special operations training had taught her patience, the ability to wait motionless for hours while gathering intelligence that might prove crucial later. At precisely 800 hours, a silver Toyota Camry pulled through the base gates. Chen watched through his office window as David Kozlov stepped out of the vehicle, looking exactly like his photograph, but somehow more ordinary in person. He wore khaki pants and a blue polo shirt with his company logo, carrying a laptop bag and appearing slightly nervous in the way most civilians did when entering a military installation. Kozlov approached the visitor processing center, where he presented his credentials to the duty sergeant with practiced efficiency. Chen observed the interaction through binoculars, noting how the terrorist maintained perfect eye contact and answered questions with just the right amount of deference. Someone had trained him well. The base security office had been briefed to treat Kozlov's visit as routine, with no special protocols or additional scrutiny that might alert him to the investigation. Chen had struggled with the decision to allow a suspected terrorist free access to sensitive areas, but Sarah had convinced him that catching the entire network was worth the calculated risk. Kozlov's first stop was Building 247, where he was scheduled to perform routine maintenance on the communication servers. Chen had arranged for subtle surveillance cameras to monitor the area, positioned to look like standard security equipment rather than targeted observation. Through his earpiece, Chen heard Sarah's voice providing real-time updates on Kozlov's activities. She had positioned herself in a maintenance corridor adjacent to the server room, using fiber optic equipment to monitor his work without being detected. He's accessing systems beyond his stated work order, Sarah reported quietly. Installing software that doesn't match his maintenance documentation. Chen felt his pulse quicken. They were witnessing active espionage but couldn't intervene without compromising the larger investigation. The evidence they gathered today would need to be actionable against Kozlov's entire network, not just the man himself. Kozlov worked with methodical precision, his fingers moving across keyboards with the confidence of someone who had performed similar operations many times before. The software he installed was sophisticated, designed to collect and transmit data while remaining invisible to standard security scans. He's good, Sarah admitted over the comm channel. The programs he's installing are military-grade surveillance tools. This isn't some amateur operation. Chen made detailed notes of everything he observed, creating a record that could later be used in military court proceedings. The documentation needed to be precise and thorough, as any procedural errors could allow Kozlov and his associates to escape prosecution. At 10:30 hours, Kozlov completed his work in the communication center and moved to his next scheduled location. Chen followed at a discreet distance, maintaining the pretense of conducting routine security rounds while actually coordinating surveillance with Sarah. The terrorist's next target was the base personnel office, where employee records and deployment schedules were maintained. Kozlov's cover story involved upgrading security software, but his actual activities focused on accessing personnel databases that contained sensitive information about military families. He's downloading files, Sarah reported from her new observation position. Personal information, home addresses, family member details. They're building target lists. The implications were terrifying. Kozlov wasn't just gathering intelligence about base operations. He was collecting information that could be used to threaten or blackmail military personnel. Family members could become leverage points for recruiting additional assets or silencing potential witnesses. Chen realized they were observing something far more extensive than a simple espionage operation. The terrorists were building infrastructure for ongoing infiltration and control, creating capabilities that could be activated for multiple attack scenarios. "Can we trace where the data is going?" Chen asked through his comm unit. "Working on it," Sarah replied. "He's using sophisticated encryption and routing protocols. This will take time to unravel." Kozlov finished his work in the personnel office and proceeded to the base cafeteria for lunch, maintaining his cover as a normal contractor taking a routine break. Chen watched him order a sandwich and coffee, marveling at how someone could commit serious crimes against national security while appearing completely unremarkable. During lunch, Sarah used the opportunity to examine Kozlov's work more closely. She accessed the systems he had compromised, using her specialized training to understand the malware he had installed without triggering its detection protocols. "It's worse than we thought," she reported. "These programs aren't just collecting data, they're creating persistent access points. Even after Kozlov leaves, they'll continue gathering intelligence and could potentially be used to disrupt base operations." Chen felt a chill of understanding. The terrorists weren't just planning a single attack, they were building capabilities for sustained warfare against military infrastructure. Kozlov's work today was laying groundwork for operations that could continue for months or years. The afternoon brought new challenges as Kozlov moved to increasingly sensitive areas of the base. His contractor credentials granted him access to facilities that contained classified information about ship movements, personnel deployments, and equipment capabilities. "He's photographing documents," Sarah reported from outside the base operations center, using a device that looks like a standard tablet but contains high-resolution cameras. Chen documented every violation they witnessed, building a comprehensive case against Kozlov while struggling with the knowledge that they couldn't intervene without compromising the investigation. Each minute of surveillance added to their evidence but also allowed more intelligence to fall into enemy hands. At 1500 hours, Kozlov's workday was scheduled to end. Chen watched as the terrorist packed his equipment and prepared to leave the base, carrying with him terabytes of stolen information and having established multiple access points for future intelligence gathering. "Do we let him go?" Chen asked Sarah through their comm channel. "For now," she replied grimly. "Tonight we follow him to see where this intelligence goes and who he reports to. The real operation is just beginning." As Kozlov's silver Camry disappeared through the base gates, Chen realized that everything he thought he knew about military security had been fundamentally challenged. The enemy wasn't just at the gates, they were inside, wearing friendly faces and carrying legitimate credentials, stealing America's secrets one routine maintenance call at a time. The surveillance operation began at sunset, with Sarah and Chen positioned in separate vehicles outside David Kozlov's suburban home in Virginia Beach. The house looked completely normal, a modest, two-story colonial with a well-maintained lawn and American flag hanging from the front porch. It was exactly the kind of residence that would never attract suspicious attention from neighbors or law enforcement. Sarah sat in a nondescript Ford sedan, equipped with specialized surveillance equipment, her SEAL training making her comfortable with long periods of motionless observation. Through high-powered optics, she could see Kozlov moving around inside his house, apparently following a normal evening routine of dinner and television. Chen occupied a position 3 blocks away, serving as backup surveillance and communication relay with base security. His stomach churned with nervous energy as he realized he was participating in his first real counterintelligence operation, where mistakes could have consequences far beyond military paperwork. "Target is active inside the residence," Sarah reported through encrypted communications. "No signs of unusual behavior yet." At 20:47 hours, Kozlov's garage door opened and his silver Camry backed into the street. Sarah started her engine and began following at a careful distance, while Chen moved to an intercept position that would allow him to take over surveillance if needed. Kozlov drove with mechanical precision, obeying every traffic law and maintaining exactly the speed limit. His route took him through residential neighborhoods and commercial districts, following a path that seemed random but actually served to identify any surveillance attempts. "He's conducting counter-surveillance maneuvers," Sarah observed, making random turns, varying his speed, checking his mirrors constantly. This guy has serious training. After 30 minutes of careful driving, Kozlov pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour fitness center. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe the entrance while Chen established an overwatch position, covering the facility's rear exit. "Interesting choice for a meeting location," Chen commented. "Lots of people coming and going, multiple exit routes. Legitimate reason to carry a bag." Kozlov entered the fitness center carrying his laptop bag, but instead of heading to the locker rooms or exercise equipment, he proceeded directly to the facility's cafe area. Sarah observed through windows as he purchased coffee and selected a table in the corner, positioning himself where he could see anyone approaching. At 21:15 hours, a woman in workout clothes approached Kozlov's table. She appeared to be in her 40s, with short blonde hair and the lean build of someone who exercised regularly. To casual observers, she looked like any other gym member taking a coffee break. "We have contact," Sarah reported. "Unknown female appears to be the handler." The woman sat across from Kozlov, and they began what looked like casual conversation. However, Sarah's trained eye noticed subtle signs that indicated a much more serious discussion. Both individuals maintained awareness of their surroundings, and their body language suggested tension, despite their relaxed appearances. "I need to get closer," Sarah said, going to enter the facility. She moved quickly to her vehicle's trunk where specialized equipment allowed her to transform her appearance within minutes. A different jacket, glasses, and subtle changes to her posture created the illusion of being a completely different person, skills learned. During deep cover operations in hostile territory, Sarah entered the fitness center and approached the cafe area, selecting a table within listening range of Kozlov's conversation. Her enhanced hearing, trained through years of combat operations, allowed her to pick up fragments of their discussion despite their attempts at discretion. The woman was questioning Kozlov about his day's activities with professional thoroughness. She wanted to know about security procedures, personnel reactions, and any signs that his work had attracted attention. Her questions revealed intimate knowledge of intelligence-gathering operations. "The base systems are more sophisticated than expected," Kozlov reported quietly. "It will take several more visits to establish complete access." "That's acceptable," the woman replied. "Timeline flexibility is built into the operation." "What about the personnel records?" "Downloaded successfully. The target list is extensive, over 300 military families with exploitable vulnerabilities." Sarah felt her blood run cold as she realized they were discussing American families as potential targets for coercion or violence. This wasn't just espionage, it was preparation for systematic attacks on civilian dependents. The woman pulled out a tablet and showed Kozlov something that made him nod with apparent satisfaction. Sarah wished she could see the screen, but her position didn't allow a clear view without compromising her cover. "The next phase requires additional assets," the woman continued. "We have 3 more contractors scheduled to begin work at different installations next week." Chen's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. Vehicle approaching the rear of the building. Black SUV with tinted windows. Sarah processed this information while continuing to monitor Kozlov's conversation. The arrival of additional personnel suggested this meeting was more significant than a simple intelligence transfer. 2 men entered the fitness center and moved purposefully toward the cafe area. They wore civilian clothes but carried themselves with military bearing, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. When they approached Kozlov's table, the dynamic changed immediately. "Time to go," one of the men said quietly to Kozlov and the woman. The group began gathering their belongings with practiced efficiency. Sarah realized she was witnessing the activation of some kind of emergency protocol, possibly triggered by concerns about surveillance or operational security. "They're moving," she reported to Chen. 4 individuals preparing to leave together. Sarah faced a crucial decision. She could follow the group and potentially learn more about their organization, but doing so would risk exposing herself and compromising future operations. Alternatively, she could maintain her position and gather intelligence about their communication methods and meeting protocols. Before she could decide, one of the newly arrived men looked directly at her. For just a moment their eyes met across the cafe, and Sarah saw recognition flash in his expression. Her cover had been blown. "Abort," she said quietly into her comm unit. "I've been made." The man who had spotted her spoke urgently to his companions, and the entire group began moving toward the exit with obvious haste. Sarah knew she had seconds to decide whether to pursue them or extract herself safely. Kozlov's handler dropped something on the floor as they hurried away, a small device that looked like a standard USB drive. Sarah realized it might contain crucial intelligence about their operations, but retrieving it would require exposing herself to additional risk. "Chen, they're coming out the front entrance," she reported, 4 individuals moving fast toward the parking lot. Through the cafe windows, Sarah watched as the group split up, with Kozlov and the woman heading toward his silver Camry, while the 2 men moved toward the black SUV. Their coordination suggested extensive planning and preparation. "For exactly this kind of situation, I'm in position to follow one vehicle," Chen reported. "Which target do you want me to track?" Sarah made a split-second decision that would determine the direction of their entire investigation. The choice between following Kozlov back to his normal routine or pursuing the unknown operatives who had triggered the emergency extraction. "Follow the SUV," she instructed. "I'll handle Kozlov." As the 2 vehicles left the parking lot in different directions, Sarah realized that the evening's surveillance had revealed far more than they had expected. The terrorist network was larger, more sophisticated, and closer to activation than anyone had imagined. The black SUV led Chen through a maze of residential streets and commercial districts, its driver employing sophisticated evasion techniques that confirmed his suspicions about the occupant's professional training. Chen maintained surveillance from a careful distance, using skills he had learned in military police training, but had never expected to apply in a real counterintelligence operation. Meanwhile, Sarah followed Kozlov's silver Camry as it headed toward what appeared to be a completely different destination than his home. The terrorist was clearly implementing contingency protocols, abandoning his normal routine in response to the evening's unexpected developments. "Target 1 is heading toward the industrial district," Chen reported through encrypted communications. "These guys know what they're doing. They're using every counter-surveillance technique in the book." The SUV's route took it through areas where surveillance would be difficult to maintain, including several parking garages and residential complexes with multiple exit points. Chen had to make split-second decisions about when to follow closely and when to hang back, balancing the risk of losing his targets against the danger of being detected. Sarah faced similar challenges as Kozlov's driving became increasingly erratic. He made sudden turns, doubled back on his route, and varied his speed in patterns designed to flush out any following vehicles. Her SEAL training included extensive instruction in surveillance and counter-surveillance, but this was her first opportunity to apply those skills against a professional operative. "Target 2 is approaching the waterfront," Sarah reported. "Looks like he's heading for the Marina District." At 22:47 hours, Kozlov's Camry pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour storage facility near the Norfolk Harbor. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe the entrance while maintaining radio contact with Chen, who was still tracking the SUV through increasingly complex urban terrain. Kozlov entered the storage facility using a key card, suggesting he had prepared this location as a safe house or equipment cache. Sarah realized she was witnessing the activation of sophisticated backup plans that had been months or years in preparation. "I'm going in for a closer look," she told. "Chen, maintain surveillance on your targets." Sarah approached the storage facility on foot, using shadows and cover to avoid security cameras. Her black clothing and small stature allowed her to move through the area virtually invisible, skills refined through countless infiltration operations in hostile territory. Through a window in the facility's office, she could see Kozlov accessing a storage unit in the back section of the building. He was removing equipment from boxes and assembling what appeared to be sophisticated communications gear. 20 minutes later, Chen's voice crackled through her earpiece with urgent news. The SUV just pulled into a warehouse complex about 3 miles from your location. I count at least 6 additional vehicles in the parking area. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. The evening's events weren't just a routine intelligence meeting. They were witnessing the activation of a terrorist cell that had been dormant and waiting for orders. Description of the facility? She asked. Large warehouse building, probably 50,000 square feet, Chen reported. Multiple entrances, good sight lines in all directions. Looks like they chose this place specifically for security. Sarah continued observing Kozlov as he completed his equipment setup. The communications gear he assembled was military grade, capable of encrypted satellite transmission, and probably worth more than most people's annual salary. At 23:15 hours, Kozlov began transmitting. Sarah couldn't intercept the encrypted communications, but she could observe his behavior and timing. The transmission lasted exactly 12 minutes, suggesting it followed a predetermined protocol. Chen, get photos of every vehicle at that warehouse, she instructed. License plates, make and model, any distinguishing features. We need to identify these people. Chen acknowledged the instruction and began documenting everything he could observe from his surveillance position. The warehouse facility showed signs of recent activity, with fresh tire tracks in the parking area and lights visible in multiple sections of the building. Kozlov completed his transmission and began disassembling the communications equipment. His movements were quick and efficient, suggesting he had practiced this procedure many times. Within 10 minutes, all traces of his activity had been erased and the equipment secured in containers that could be quickly relocated. Target 2 is moving again, Sarah reported as Kozlov prepared to leave the storage facility. Instead of returning to his vehicle, Kozlov walked to a different section of the parking lot where a motorcycle was hidden behind a dumpster. The switch in transportation was another indication of his professional training and preparation for emergency scenarios. Sarah faced a critical decision. Following a motorcycle through city traffic would be extremely difficult, and she risked losing him entirely. However, his destination might provide crucial intelligence about the terrorist network's operational plans. I'm going to attempt to track him, she told Chen. If I lose contact, proceed with documenting everything at the warehouse location. Kozlov started the motorcycle and pulled out of the storage facility, heading toward the highway that connected Norfolk to other major cities along the eastern seaboard. Sarah followed in her sedan, staying as far back as traffic conditions allowed. The motorcycle's speed and maneuverability gave Kozlov significant advantages in avoiding surveillance. He wove through traffic, used highway on-ramps and off-ramps to change direction suddenly, and took advantage of every opportunity to identify potential followers. After 40 minutes of high-speed pursuit, Kozlov's motorcycle turned into an abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of Virginia Beach. Sarah parked outside the facility and proceeded on foot, using her night vision equipment to track his movements through the darkened buildings. The industrial park contained dozens of empty warehouses and office buildings, creating a maze of potential hiding places and escape routes. Sarah moved carefully through the area, aware that she was now operating alone in potentially hostile territory. She found Kozlov's motorcycle parked behind Building 7, a 3-story structure that appeared to have been vacant for several years. Light was visible through windows on the second floor, indicating the building was being used despite its abandoned appearance. Sarah approached the building carefully, using her climbing skills to access an exterior fire escape that would allow her to observe the second-floor activities. What she saw through the windows made her blood run cold. The floor contained at least a dozen people working with maps, computers, and what appeared to be detailed plans of multiple military installations. The walls were covered with photographs, diagrams, and charts that clearly showed preparation for coordinated attacks. In the center of the room, a large table displayed a scale model of Norfolk Naval Base, with different sections marked in red. Small flags and markers indicated specific targets, timing sequences, and what could only be described as assault routes. Sarah realized she was looking at the operational headquarters for a terrorist attack that would dwarf anything previously attempted against American military installations. The scope and sophistication of the planning suggested months or years of preparation by people with intimate knowledge of military procedures and security weaknesses. Her training told her to extract immediately and report what she had discovered to higher authority. But as she watched the terrorists finalizing their plans, she realized that time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she used her encrypted satellite phone to contact Naval Intelligence Headquarters. What she had discovered required immediate action at the highest levels of military command, but she also knew that any coordinated response would take hours to organize. Control, this is Falcon 7, she whispered into the secure communication device. I have eyes on an active terrorist command center. Multiple hostiles planning imminent assault on Norfolk Naval Base. The response was immediate and professional. Falcon 7, authenticate your position and provide detailed intelligence. Sarah transmitted GPS coordinates and began describing what she observed through the second-floor windows. The terrorist team was working with military precision, following checklists and protocols that suggested extensive planning and coordination. 20 minutes later, Chen's voice joined the secure communication channel. Control, this is Guardian 2. I've documented 17 vehicles and approximately 30 personnel at the warehouse facility. They appear to be loading equipment for immediate deployment. The intelligence analysts at headquarters quickly realized they were facing a sophisticated terrorist operation that was entering its final execution phase. Alert notifications went out to base commanders across the eastern seaboard, but the primary target remained Norfolk Naval Base. Falcon 7, maintain observation and provide real-time intelligence, Control instructed. Tactical response teams are being deployed, but arrival time is estimated at 45 minutes. Sarah watched as the terrorists completed their preparations. Maps were folded and secured. Equipment was loaded into vehicles and personnel received final briefings about their individual assignments. The scale model of Norfolk Naval Base was being disassembled, its components packed into cases that could be quickly transported. Through her binoculars, she could see Kozlov pointing to specific locations on charts while explaining details to other team members. His insider knowledge of base security procedures was clearly the foundation for their entire operation. Control, the hostiles are preparing to move, Sarah reported. Estimated 15 to 20 personnel with professional military training. Equipment includes communications gear, tactical weapons, and what appears to be explosive devices. Chen's surveillance position at the warehouse revealed similar activity. Vehicles were being loaded with personnel and equipment, suggesting coordination between multiple terrorist cells that would launch simultaneous attacks. Guardian 2, I count 8 vehicles departing the warehouse facility, Chen reported. Mixed civilian and commercial vehicles all proceeding toward Norfolk. Sarah faced an impossible decision. Her orders were to maintain surveillance and provide intelligence, but she could see that the terrorist operation was larger and more imminent than anyone had anticipated. Waiting for official response teams might allow the attack to proceed before adequate defenses could be established. From her position on the fire escape, she could hear fragments of conversation as the terrorists completed their final preparations. References to Phase 1 and simultaneous breach suggested a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm base security through multiple simultaneous attacks. Control, based on intercepted communications, the attack is scheduled to begin within 2 hours, Sarah reported. They're planning multiple breach points with coordinated timing. The response from headquarters was swift and decisive. All units, this is Control. Operation Nightfall is now active. All available assets are being deployed for immediate response. Sarah heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors as military aircraft began moving toward the area, but she also realized that the terrorists had chosen their timing specifically to minimize the effectiveness of airborne response during nighttime operations. Falcon 7, you are authorized to take direct action if necessary to prevent enemy assault, Control transmitted. Use your discretion based on tactical situation. The authorization gave Sarah permission to abandon her surveillance role and actively engage the terrorists if circumstances required it. Her SEAL training had prepared her for exactly this kind of scenario, but operating alone against multiple professional operatives would test every skill she possessed. Chen received similar authorization at his position. Guardian 2, coordinate with base security to establish defensive positions. Priority is preventing terrorist access to sensitive areas. As the terrorists began leaving the abandoned industrial park, Sarah made her decision. She could follow them and provide intelligence about their movements, or she could attempt to disrupt their operation through direct action. Control, "I'm going to attempt infiltration of the terrorist command vehicle," she reported. "If I can access their communications, we might be able to coordinate our response with their attack timing." Before headquarters could respond, Sarah was already moving. She rappelled down the building's exterior wall and approached the parking area where the terrorists were conducting final equipment checks. Her small stature and dark clothing allowed her to move between vehicles virtually invisible. The terrorists were focused on their preparations and failed to notice as she approached Kozlov's motorcycle, where he was securing encrypted communication equipment. Sarah waited until Kozlov moved away from the motorcycle, then quickly accessed the communication gear. Her technical training allowed her to install a monitoring device that would intercept and relay terrorist communications to naval intelligence. "Device is active," she reported through her earpiece. "You should begin receiving their communications within minutes." The monitoring device immediately began transmitting intercepted conversations as the terrorist teams coordinated their final approach to Norfolk Naval Base. Sarah could hear multiple voices discussing entry points, timing sequences, and target priorities. Chen had reached Norfolk Naval Base and was working with base security to establish defensive positions based on the intelligence Sarah was providing. His knowledge of base layout and security procedures proved invaluable as they prepared to counter an attack from multiple directions. "Base security is implementing emergency protocols," Chen reported. "All non-essential personnel are being evacuated, and tactical response teams are positioning at likely breach points." Sarah began following the terrorist convoy as it departed the industrial park, maintaining communication with both Chen and Naval Intelligence Headquarters. The vehicles moved through Virginia Beach toward Norfolk, following routes that had obviously been scouted and planned in advance. 20 minutes later, the convoy split into 3 groups approaching Norfolk Naval Base from different directions. Sarah realized she could only follow one group and would have to trust that Chen and base security could handle the other assault teams. "Control, hostile forces are implementing coordinated assault from 3 directions," she reported. "I'm tracking the primary group with Kozlov." The night sky above Norfolk began filling with the sound of military aircraft as Naval Intelligence's response teams converged on the area. But Sarah knew that the next 30 minutes would determine whether American military personnel lived or died. As Kozlov's group approached the base perimeter, Sarah prepared for the most dangerous phase of her mission. Everything that had led to this moment, Chen's mistake, her blown cover, the surveillance operation, had been preparation for a confrontation that would test whether months of intelligence gathering could prevent a terrorist attack that threatened to be the deadliest assault on American military forces since Pearl Harbor. The battle for Norfolk Naval Base was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez was the only person positioned to stop it before it started.